This show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hello and welcome to Thinking Tree series. Today we have with us Samar Singh Shekhawat. He is business consultant and the business advisory. He has been working in the corporate world since last 32 years, guiding and consulting companies from UK to Dutch to India and the American companies. So today we'll discuss about the important topic of entrepreneurship and wealth creation in India, because if we see, India has been the third largest ecosystem for entrepreneurship after Brazil and South Korea. So this is an important topic for India and the job creation for the Indian youth. So in order to reap the benefits of demographic dividend, today we discuss this topic, how to create job and the wealth in our country. Sir has been working in the UB Limited previously, and now he's working as an independent consultant, marketing advisor, and the giant in the field of business advisory. So, welcome, sir. Thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you, Sanat. Thank you for having me.
To begin with, there have been multiple interventions by the current government to give boost to entrepreneurs in India, like Startup India, reduction in the corporate income tax in 2019 for new companies, and the government started in 2014 the Make in India program, then the Startup India, Skill India. To what extent do you think that these have been successful in creating more jobs in our country?
So first of all, Startup India is not the only policy intervention that the government has. They have Digital India, they have Make in India, they have Skill India, they have Stand Up India, they have Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojanas, and there are many such initiatives and policy platforms that the government has come out with. These have certain specific qualification criteria. They involve center and state participation. They also involve public and private participation. There are different government departments involved in formulating and executing these platforms, and their aim is simplification of business, funding help for startup businesses, as well as partnering with academia. Yes. Now, in terms of your question, how successful have they been? Frankly, they have not been very successful for a variety of reasons. They have created only about 187,000 direct jobs under Startup India. And they use a factor of 3x to calculate the number of indirect jobs that they've created. And even if that number is taken, that's about 560,000 jobs only. That's about 500,000 jobs. So that's really not the scale and impact that the government wants to create. Obviously, they want to do much more. I think the intent is very good. I think it's great that we have these platforms. However, we are let down by our infrastructure. We are let down by our policies. On paper, they look good. But I think there are issues around interpretation of these policies by various government departments and bureaucrats and technocrats that are involved in these platforms. I think speed of execution is definitely an issue. Ease of doing business, while we have grown up on the ranks as far as the ease of business rank is concerned, but we are nowhere near where we should be. I think we're in the hundreds as far as ease of business ranking is concerned. There is still red tapeism and bureaucracy. And I think all this gets impacted further by the general economic downturn that existed in the pre-COVID era. And obviously it's been exacerbated by the situation around business and the protection of human life related to COVID. So far, they have funded about 244 startups. And also, these are self-reported numbers. So the 187,000 direct jobs and the 560,000 indirect jobs and the 244 startups that have been funded with an approximately about 1,000 crores given to each. These are all self-reported numbers. So in conclusion, I think the intent is excellent. Like I said, there are more than one platform that is doing this, and this is sorely needed, but much more needs to be done, largely in the areas of government, speed of response, ease of doing business, removing red tapeism, removing obstacles, single window clearances, etc. So well begun, but I think the task is nowhere near complete. On a journey of 1 to 10, I think we're at 2 or 3.
Okay. That's great, sir. Like in ease of doing business, like we currently stands at 63 number. The ranking is 63. So
Okay.
what do you think, like, because ease of doing business is a good index or not, because they cover only the Mumbai and Delhi only. And where we have startups in Bangalore, Hyderabad, like you yourself live in Bangalore, and Bangalore is one of the biggest city for startup India. So what do you think about that? Like the limitations of the measurements?
Well, obviously, we need to expand the sample set. It has to go beyond Bombay and Delhi. In fact, Bombay is nowhere near is not anywhere on the list as far as startups are concerned.
Yes.
In fact, close to 40% of all startups are actually out of Bangalore.
Yes.
And number 2 is Delhi. And
Yes.
Bangalore, because it's historically been so, it's supposed to be, the center of innovation and the Silicon Valley of India.
Yes.
And there's a climate of entrepreneurship. Delhi, because it is close to the seat of government,
Yes.
and it's close to policy making. Those have been the reasons. So I'm told, I read some numbers that seem to indicate that close to 65 to 70% of all startups are either in Bangalore or in Delhi. Bombay is very low because the simple cost of real estate is so high in
Yes.
Bombay, and therefore it's very difficult to start. So for sure, the sample set needs to cover more than just Delhi and Bombay. Bangalore, Hyderabad, Madras need to come in. There's a lot of innovation and startups happening in smaller towns. I advise clients in Jabalpur, in Indore. I advise clients in Pune. I advise clients in Chandigarh, Lucknow. So there is Guwahati. There's so many tier 1 towns also that need to get covered. If you're serious about this,
Yes.
we need to have a much wider sample set and a far more robust mechanism to measure that sample set.
Yes, indeed, because we need to discuss about the sector-wise specific, like in agriculture sector, we have a lot of startups in northeastern part, but not in the like other area. So it's like depending on the sector, manufacturing, agriculture, or services. Entrepreneurship was aimed at creating jobs in India to soak the excess labor that India is having. However, I was reading a report by IBM Institute and the Oxford Economics. They found that 90% of Indian startups fail within the first 5 years. Lack of innovation being the main reason. What interventions do you think are needed to address the success rate of these startups?
It's funny that you should ask that, because globally, the number one reason for startups failing is that there was no market for the product.
Yes.
Now, it sounds really stupid that how can a startup start if there is no market for the product? But yes, that is true. And if you notice that all successful startups address either a real human pain point or a perceived human pain point. So either they're a problem solution,
yes,
or they ease your life and make it better.
Yes.
So that's why I said either a real problem or a perceived problem. And you look at some of the successful Indian startups, which could be app-based, for instance, like Book My Show, is very clearly addressing a pain point of movie ticket booking. Or Make My Trip is clearly addressing the pain point of, hotel booking, air tickets booking, railway tickets booking, and so on and so forth. Dunzo addresses the pain point of delivery from one place to another. Uber addresses your transportation requirements. Zomato addresses the requirement of, food delivery and restaurant finding. Swiggy, people like, so the successful startups either address a real or a perceived human pain point. However, there are several other things. The term that you will hear very often in the startup ecosystem is what is called unit economics.
Yes.
Now, unit economics is there really money to be made at the first unit level? And in many cases, if the unit economics are making money from that level, then all you need is scalability and a sustained sort of hand-holding of that journey. However, even if unit economics are not making money at that unit level, as long as there is a path to profitability, as they say, and there is a revenue stream that is real and sustained, and you can manage the scale up, then there is a business. Yes. But in many cases, either there is no unit economics favorability, or the managing of the scale up to profitability is compromised. There is one other very important matter. By and large, startup founders are very young in life.
Yes.
So there is a whole issue of leadership skills and life skills and managerial capability as well. At the age of 25, 28, 30, they are typically facing problems that they would face when they were 50 years old working in a corporation. So they've simply not experienced that. And there is nothing in their upbringing or breeding or education that prepares them to handle that. And many have failed as a result of clarity or lack of clarity at the leadership level. Then another significant cause of failure is funding, because increasingly money is not easy to come by. And it's also a double-edged sword, Sanat, because if you're funded, then you have sold your soul to the funders.
Yes.
You will sit, stand, jump, basis what they say. On the other hand, if you're not funded, then it's a struggle. You can take pride at being called a bootstrapped startup, but there are several challenges and daily basis challenges of paying salaries and rents and paying all. And I've seen it as a consultant. I've had clients who have struggled to pay me. So funding is the other issue. And really, I think the critical aspect of this is focusing on the product and not on valuation. So many startups get focused only on driving valuation. And I tell them, look, either you're in the value game or you're in the valuation game. If you focus on building a great product and delivering seamless product experience and customer service experience, the valuation will come. Today, whether it's an Amazon or a Book My Show or a Make My Trip or an Uber, the product delivery in an overwhelming majority of cases is flawless.
Yes.
The moment you compromise on that, your valuation is gone. And I find too many startups and founders are focusing unnecessarily on valuation and not enough on improving the product. Now, your question in terms of what is needed to sort of change this is, at the very start, I think our educational system needs to change. Our educational system doesn't encourage startups. Today, if you tell your parents that, and we still are a family-oriented, family-dominated society, you tell your parents that Sanat Srivastava is an engineer and he wants to start up something of his own, your father will say, "Dimag kharab ho gaya, naukri kar Infosys mein ya Wipro mein aur phir kama aur phir sochenge." So I think our educational mindset, our educational system is not geared towards that. In any case, the educational curriculum is woefully behind the times. Number two, we really don't have an entrepreneurial mindset in the country. Yes, there are certain what we call mercantile communities. So Marwadis have always been business oriented. Gujaratis have always been business oriented. Baniyas have already been business oriented. But typically, let's say people in the south would rather write code and become engineers. People in the north would probably want to do some real estate business or some automobile dealership, or in the West, Maharashtrians would typically want to, let's say, look for a government job. So I think an encouragement of an entrepreneurial mindset. The third one is familial and societal support. You see, there is a sense in India that all businessmen are crooks.
Yes.
The businessman hote hi badmaash hai, hote hi chor hai. Whether that is not true. I mean, businessmen by and large are honest, just like human beings by and large are honest. And businessmen are no different. So I think looking at businessmen with respect, because every businessman gives rise to employment beyond himself or herself. They hire more people. So it's an employment generating profession. So actually they should be looked at with more respect. And I think familial support, when youngsters from your families come and say that we want to start something of ourselves, I mean, one must encourage them, because frankly, younger millennials don't see themselves in a 9-to-5 job.
Yes.
Then a couple of other things is that we need better due diligence on the part of the fund of people who are funding them, on the part of private equity, venture capital, angel investors. There needs to be better diligence in terms of seeing whether there is a model for this or not. Is the founding team capable of scaling up? Do they have managerial and leadership qualities? Is there a path to profitability? Will this business sustain in the face of competition and regulatory headwinds, for instance? So I think better due diligence, and also I think the days of easy money are gone. I think it's far harder to raise money, and obviously the government and the regulatory framework plays a large role. Sanat, in India, people succeed despite the government and not because of it.
Yes,
So those
indeed.
are some of the things that I believe we need to think of.
One point, sir, I want to like ask on this particular discussion is like I was reading in economic survey last year, the government economic survey. They were saying that in India there's an incentive to like be small, dwarf industries. So what do you think about that? In India, is there any incentive to remain small? Like if we have the GST limit also, if we have like a lot of labor laws, if we increase the scalability, the company will become big. If we compare with other countries like UK and US, they are having incentive to become big because if the company is big, they are like uh, there are less chances to fail. They create more employment.
I don't know whether you could call it as an incentive to remain small,
Yeah,
but are there benefits to remaining small? Yes, because the regulatory system and the myriad confusing policy taxation, rules and regulations, uh, you could start another company just to avoid paying tax.
obviously, yes.
So all those things are geared towards, and then again, it is subject to interpretation. So the politicians and netas also, are in it. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether there's an incentive to remain small, but certainly there is very little incentive to become big,
become big. Yes,
which is exactly what we need to focus. I mean, why can't, so, and there are very few people in India doing it. I mean, Reliance or Mukesh Ambani is one of the people who are thinking of going, becoming global. In the past, Airtel has launched businesses in South Africa. The Tatas bought Jaguar
indeed.
Motors.
Yes,
Birlas have businesses in many parts of the world. The Lakshmi Mittal. So it's a combination. The numbers are few,
yes,
frankly, but where is the next Amazon or the next? And look at Oyo, for instance.
yes,
Ritesh Agarwal has done something similar to what Airbnb has done.
yes,
I mean, you can argue that the quality of delivery and quality of product is far is inferior, but in terms of scale and ambition, he's there. So we need to encourage more of that. We need to break out of this insular sort of small mindset. And while we are fostering excellence at small business levels, which is a whole new separate discussion, by the way, of MSMEs, but we definitely need to look at, global, because at the end of the day, you have so many successful Indians heading global corporations. So
yes,
if an Indian can succeed overseas, I read somewhere that 50% of all Silicon Valley startups
yes.
have at least one Indian founder. So
That's
if
great.
Indians can, we have amongst the best doctors, lawyers in the world, in America. Many of them are Indians. I mean, Satya Nadella, who heads,
Microsoft,
Microsoft, is Indian. Sundar Pichai, who heads Google,
Google,
is Indian. Indra Nooyi, my super boss at Pepsi, is Indian. Vinod Khosla, Pentium. I mean, the numbers, Vindy Banga, Ivan Menezes of Diageo. So if they can succeed there, why can we not build the ecosystem of succeeding here at the same level?
so like if I'll ask like what are the like top three solutions to build the ecosystem in India, what would you suggest? Like,
I think, first of all, the whole approach from the government.
yeah,
If you look at the China story, and I know you're going to ask me about the China story a little later, etc. We are nowhere in the game as versus China, so I will not. So
yes,
I will reserve my comments when you ask that question. But I think the whole government attitude and approach towards businessmen, because in India, I think being rich is seen as evil.
yes,
It's seen as being bad because we have this whole Hindu philosophy of suffering and sacrifice and austerity and hardship. And frankly, the younger generation sees no romance in that, man.
yes,
If I tell my daughter that, or my father used to tell me that I used to walk to school and you went by bus, and I tell my daughter I went to school by bus and you've gone by air-conditioned, chauffeur-driven car. I mean, that's the price you pay for progress. And the younger millennials, etc., they don't want to look behind. So
seriously,
I keep saying, uh, and this is my favorite saying, Sanat, that we are shaped by our past, but we
yes,
don't have to be prisoners of our past.
no, seriously,
They're two different things.
yeah,
Right. So yes, we have tremendous heritage, robust, civilizational. We have 5,000-year-old civilization, strong sort of societal fabric, support of family, etc. People overseas actually don't have a lot of that.
yes,
Look at the way Japan rebuilt itself after the Second World War. It was completely destroyed as a nation. And look at the way China has gone after, you may argue that there's no freedom of speech and stuff, But once someone from China once told me, sir, sometimes not having a choice is a good thing.
Yes.
Because then
I
you're
can.
forced only to do one thing. Your execution, etc., takes over. And who can deny that, the Chinese execution is incredible, absolutely. So I think there are many things from government policy making to societal and cultural issues to, the macroeconomic system and, our infrastructure. There's a lot to be done on that. And the problem is, and a lot of people may not like me saying this, but I believe as a nation, we are obsessed with our past, right? Because we keep talking about Mandir yahi banega and Christians and Hindus and Soni ki chidiya. So we are obsessed with our past.
Not be able to think like forward.
So we're obsessed with our past. We are indifferent about our future, about our present. Look at the situation today, from electricity to roads to infrastructure to public health to corruption to, there's so many issues, to inequality, poverty, so many issues in the present. The entire dialogue and discourse in common media should be around that.
Yes.
Not around Pakistan and around, what's happening with Donald Trump and stuff. And there's so many problems that we have of our own. So I find ourselves obsessed with our past, indifferent about our present, and oblivious about our future.
So that thinking must be.
That thinking has to change to being obsessed with our present and invested in thinking about our future.
Yes.
That's what it has to be, from education to infrastructure to social equality to reforms to safety for women, sanitation, smart cities, garbage disposal, internet connectivity, law and order. So there's just so much to be done in this country.
Yes, indeed.
And those are some of the things that will benefit.
I was reading an article in 2010, Professor Daniel Eisenberg published from Babson College. He said that that helped the government frame their policies regarding the entrepreneurship, that particular article. It said that in seeking to help stimulate entrepreneurial high growth firms, it is important to avoid flooding the system with too much easy money, as you were talking about. This can take the form of, we can say, government grants, venture capital funds that are too easily obtained. Do you think that venture capital funding support of 10,000 crore given to Startup India was too much easy money for the startups?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure whether it was easily given. We know how difficult it is to get anything out of the government, right? I mean, income tax refunds can take years to come. So here they're delaying to give you money that is your own.
Yes.
Imagine them giving money that is theirs. So I don't think it's easy money at all. But what I do believe is it is not enough.
Not enough.
10,000 crores is nothing. That is $1.5 billion. That's every average large size startup in India gets that kind of funding on its own from the Sequoias and Tigers and TPGs and Firestones of the world. So in terms of amount, it is nothing. But overall, I think there is easy money in the system, and that's quite easily available from the private from private funding. I think that has all changed. We need better guardrails to determine whether I should invest in this business. Better due diligence, as I said earlier on. We need much more accountability. Once money has been invested, we need much more accountability on the part of both the investors as well as the founders in terms of how the business is going. And I think, frankly, it is also the fault of private equity, venture capital, angel investors, because they all get bonuses, and I shouldn't say it, but they all get kickbacks as well.
Yes.
From companies, from the system. It's a reality. Whether it's the banking system, I mean, it's not talked about at all. But I know for a fact, because I'm in this ecosystem, I know that they're also in a rush to meet their targets and numbers, just like bankers are. Yes. So they get their bonuses, they get their incentives, they get their kickbacks. So in some ways, there is corruption there as well. I will give you funding provided you give me back 5% or 10%. So now, if the moment you have that thought process, your due diligence, etc., goes out of the window. And the other thing is that a lot of it is driven by sentiment as well, right? The entire stock market runs on sentiment. Gold prices run on sentiment. Yes. Real estate prices run on sentiment. And therefore, funding also in the initial early days. See, frankly, India is very young in this journey.
Yes.
We are still very young, only about 8 or 10 years old. We are still driven a lot by sentiment and by herd mentality. वो कहते हैं ना हिंदुस्तान में भेड़ चाल बहुत है.
Yes.
What we call fear of missing out, FOMO, as your generation lives by FOMO, right?
Yes.
I say convert that FOMO to JOMO, which is joy of missing out, right? So the fear of missing out that if I don't invest, frankly, Google taking stake in Vodafone is also that. It's fear of missing out because they're tying up with someone else and stuff. So I think everyone wants to be everywhere. That is where your herd mentality comes in. And also remember, Sanat, at the end of it, for every startup that succeeds, there are literally thousands that fail. Nobody talks about the one that have failed. We all talk about the one that have succeeded.
Do you think that Indian entrepreneurs run the risk of complacency more than the entrepreneurs in the foreign countries? Give your inadequacy in innovation. What do you think about that?
I think the cultural context is different. We tend to live with our families. Overseas, especially in the Western world, if you're 18, you get kicked out of home by your parents, and they say, please go and earn your own living, right? And college is so expensive that only people who are serious about it, only either very rich, children of very rich parents, or people can afford to go to college or do higher education, or people who are taking, education loans, they pay their way through it. In fact, education loan debt in America is now in several $1 trillion. It's an enormous burden that they are facing. So the cultural context is different. We always have family support and safety nets. Tomorrow, Sanat's father may tell him that, go ahead, start this Ecolics. If it doesn't work, you can always go back to a job. You can always come back home. Main falani uncle se phone kar dunga, wahan naukri kar lo. So that I'm not saying specifically for you, but that is true for so there is a whole safety net of the family support and that exists in this country. I think things like increasing and improving the government's role, the role of education, changing the entire curriculum, cheaper. In India, education is very cheap. Yes. So everyone gets educated. Everyone, the number of graduates. I remember doing some numbers for Heineken about 4 or 5 years ago. We produce 350,000 MBAs every year. We produce 52,000 doctors every year. The number of doctors, by the way, is very low for a country like ours. Yes. And we produce about 1.5 million engineers every year.
Oh, God.
Now, where will all these engineers get jobs from? So they're on paper, they all have degrees. But from an employability point of view, because the educational curriculum and the course material is so dated and not relevant and not updated, their employability is very poor. As an end user, I mean, I remember going to IIM Indore, interviewing 72 students and selecting one, simply because we had committed to IIM Indore that we will hire someone from you. Now, it's not specifically the fault of IIM Indore.
Yes.
It's, the whole rush for everyone to become a graduate and stuff, but that doesn't mean you're employable. Yes. So the ability, and you look at the Western world, you look at America, you look at Western Europe, there's a lot of vocational training. So people, after finishing school, and even if they don't go to school, they can become plumbers, architects, they can become drivers, they can become electricians, they can do carpentry, and there is decent money to be made out of that. Become petrol pump attendants, run a supermarket, drive milk delivery vans, drive garbage disposal trucks. There is dignity of labor in the West. There's a decent money you can make. There's social security that protects you, and so on and so forth. Those are attractive career options. Yes. For certain people. We don't have that in India. In India, we have to be Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, so now you can tell people to be Atmanirbhar if there is a safety net, if there's social security or a public, pension fund kind of scheme that protects them. So I think those things need to change. Also, you have to understand, Sanat, we have low aspirations. See, Indians by nature are not ambitious people. It's part of our Hindu philosophy of live and let live as well. We are very tolerant as a nation. We are satisfied with very little because we've always had to do with very little. We were ruled by the British for 200 years and by the Mughals before that for 500-700 years. So we also have a little bit of a slave mentality. Yes. And I'm not sure we are actually suited to democracy. I don't think we have the capability of governing ourselves. Yes. I mean, the very fact that we behave the way we do during Corona's times, or the way we vote. In India, they say that you don't cast your vote, you vote your caste.
Seriously.
Right. So I'm not sure whether we're mature enough to be a democracy, really. But we are also satisfied with very little. Our level of aspiration is very low. And then we discussed a little earlier our thinking ability of being of thinking at a global scale is weak.
Yes.
We have a little bit of an inferiority complex versus the Western world.
Yes.
We believe that we cannot, succeed against them. And frankly, on that, the vocal for local is a great initiative, but of course, much more needs to be done beyond just a slogan. But I think a combination of low aspiration levels and ability to think or inability to think at a global level actually mitigate against that. Very importantly, also, we are not big on the patents game, whether it is product patents or process patents. There is a lot of work that is done by Indian scientists overseas, and they have patents to that. I mean, yoga, for instance, the US has the patent to yoga. For God's sake, it was invented here.
Yes.
Why should we not have the patent? The patent for basmati rice doesn't exist with India. So where are we on that game, right? Someone else has patented something that is a patent for Darjeeling tea is not with us. I mean, why should it be like that? These are things that are endemic to our culture. We were sitting, and not doing anything about it. So our whole game on patent, then our ability to survive without protectionism, without laws, without tariff barriers, because at the end of the day, to succeed, you need to operate in a free market. And in a free market, merit, efficiency, competence, quality, speed is all what is the only thing that matters, right? Yeah. You can build artificial walls temporarily to protect your domestic industry, to grow it until it is ready to take on the world. Seriously. But we've been doing that for 70 plus years. When will we be ready to take on the world? Seriously. We talked about Chinese society, and when a little later in the talk, we'll talk about that. Yes. One last thing I want to say is we as a nation have no fear of the law. We spit with impunity. We run traffic lights with impunity. We cheat on our taxes. Yes. We're very happy breaking the law, and there's no fear of consequences of breaking the law.
Yes, seriously.
So civic society and government both have to play a role. I mean, John Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." In some ways, our Prime Minister is saying the same thing, but the whole culture, the hardest thing to do, Sanat, is to change your mindset, to change your thinking. And only if we do that, will we as a nation change. I mean, do you said from some simple things like not throwing kachra out of a moving car on the road, not spitting out. I mean, I see people in BMWs and Mercedes doing that, boss.
I've seen that. Yes.
So I mean, you segregating garbage, rainwater harvesting, to bahut dur ki baat hai. Yes. So I mean, some basic things have to change. In Bangalore, I haven't stepped out of my house. Literally, I haven't exited the front door since the 11th of March. Now, yesterday, I go running on my driveway here inside the colony, and I saw people walking on the road without masks. Yes. So, boss, no law. I mean, you need to change it yourself. So these are some of the things that I think need to change for us to, do better on entrepreneurship.
Yes. So a lot of behavioral changes required.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yes. As we all know that the growth trajectory of India has not been followed by the popular economics, like from agriculture to manufacturing to services. India skipped the middle phase, like growth phase, and landed directly from agriculture to services in 1991 due to compulsion, that is for liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Then do you think that we have enough government support in the manufacturing industry to rectify this imbalance with entrepreneurship and manufacturing, especially focus on manufacturing?
See, I'm not sure why you're saying we skipped the manufacturing phase, because in India, even today, it is very much agricultural production, driving, manufacturing, driving services, driving consumption. I mean, there's a popular saying in India that the finance minister of India is the monsoon. Not because if you have a great monsoon, then agricultural production, agricultural crop yield goes up and the farmers have money, and then that fuels the input for manufacturing, and then people engaged in that have money, and then when they produce goods and it is consumed in the form of services and goods, etc., then that drives consumption. However, there is a difference. The difference is that, and this is why the Prime Minister locked down, people tell me that the Prime Minister locked down at 500 cases, I don't know what the decision will be tomorrow on lockdown 5.0, whatever, but we shut down at 500 cases and we're opening up at close to 170,000 cases.
Yes, yes, yes.
The reality is that in India, and he said, Jaan hai to jahan hai, right? He also later on said, Jaan bhi, jahan bhi, because unlike the Western world, where the level of automation and digitization is much higher than in India, and where human capital costs much more, and human beings are much fewer in number. In our case, we have the second largest population in the world, and our human capital drives the entire economy, unlike in the West. So the large unorganized sector, we are still predominantly agriculture, even manufacturing, the levels of automation are much lower than in the West. And our services consumption is also driven a lot by humans. At restaurants, you'll have 10 people serving you and you'll have 10 people behind us. So it's the human capital, it drives our economy. So that is why it is very critical for us to protect our human capital. So in 1986, when I finished my college, the proportion of the rural economy and to the urban economy split in India was 80-20. 80% of our economy was rural, 20% was urban. Today, in 2019 or last year, I mean, let's say 54 years later, or let's say 14 and 33 years later, rural has come down to 68, urban is 32.
Yes.
Now, rural has declined in percentage terms, not in absolute terms.
Okay.
Absolute has already gone up much more. Similarly, urban has grown not only in percentage, but also in absolute terms.
Absolutely.
Which means what? While we are one of the most rural economies in the world, we're also one of the fastest industrializing and fastest urbanizing economies in the world. So there are two peculiar challenges that very few countries face.
Yes, yes.
Now, everyone talks about made in India, right? I completely agree with it. But according to me, that's only the first step. Because made in India's second step is made by India.
Made by India, yes.
And the third step is made for India. What does that mean? Now, made in India, today if Samsung comes in or Xiaomi comes in or Apple comes in and makes something in India and takes it away for the markets overseas, then it's only made in India and we will get a small part of the pie.
Yes.
But if it is made by India, so for instance, Indians investing in India, maybe for the overseas markets. So manufacturing in India and selling it overseas, that is made by India.
Made by India, yes.
How about made for India? Which means making it for the domestic market. The first reason that people want to go to China is not their sourcing, that it is cheap in sourcing, which it is, and world-class infrastructure and so on and so forth. Absolutely. But the large domestic market, boss.
Yes.
Which is not there in India. So if that is the single biggest advantage that I will make in China for China.
For China.
So I'm saying made in India is great, but I think we need to also talk about made in India, made by India, made for India.
Yeah, yes.
Why can't China today is the factory of the world? Maybe we can't become the factory of the world. Why can't we become the sourcing hub of the world in so many product categories? China has been investing for the last 50 years on this.
Yes.
We started in some fashion in 1991 onwards when, under Narasimha Rao was the prime minister and Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, and they started liberalizing the economy. Incidentally, I believe that Narasimha Rao is the unsung hero of the Indian economy because the Congress hated him. And of course, the BJP is not going to give him any credit, but truly he was the man who started it all off along with Manmohan Singh. So if you look at China, they've been doing it for 50 years. And the scale that they've invested on, the supply chain, that extremely dense supply chain that they have, their ease of business, single window clearance, etc., is way ahead of ours. And as we spoke a little earlier, things like Skill India and vocational training that I spoke about, all this needs to, much more needs to be done on this front. We have to drive this. See, our labor is cheap. In fact, labor in China has become more expensive now. And in China, things are moving to South China, where it is slightly cheaper, right? So we have an advantage of labor. We are capable of great quality. If our guys can write code and we can, we can do medical transcription, we the BPO factory of the world, where service levels are demanded and some of the best engineers in the world are from India. We are capable of good quality. Our traditional handicrafts are fantastic quality. We're capable of that. Our cinema, our music, our digital, our animation is some of it is world class. All the Lord of the Rings back-end work was being done in an animation studio in Chennai. So we are capable of that. But the problem is that while we may not, I'll tell you where we're losing up. We don't have the cheapest labor in the world. Labor in Guatemala, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam is cheaper than ours.
Yes.
We also don't have the best quality in the world because China, America, Western Europe, some of them have the best quality. We are somewhere in the middle, right? Now we compete at that mid level.
Yes.
Right. And there is market to be made there. We can't go down. We can't probably become the cheapest labor in the world because because that goes against the grain of growing as an economy. Yes. Right. So we can compete at the middle level and we can aspire to be at the high level. That's number one. Number two, we can, within this middle level, where it is good quality at decent labor costs on items that we have traditional strengths in, that is something that we should push while we aspire to get to the higher level as well. And the high level obviously means competing on scale, because a lot of people who are talking about moving out of China are actually moving purely for cost reasons, and they are moving to Pakistan, Guatemala, Vietnam, Bangladesh, not to India.
Not to India.
Because we have complex labor laws, complex land laws, and there are many more things to it.
Many more formalities, yes. As I was reading an article in Harvard Business Review, after the success of Silicon Valley, since you are living in India's Silicon Valley, popularly called Bengaluru, so the governments around the world have put too much effort into replicating it in their own country. Like they are just copying Silicon Valley model to their own country, while ignoring the fact that Silicon Valley was the result of a unique set of circumstances. What was required instead was for the government to build the ecosystem on local condition, grow existing industries and build on their foundation, skill, capabilities, rather than attempting to launch high-tech industries from scratch. What do you think was India's case? Did we try building ourselves a Silicon Valley, or did we nurture our existing industry?
I think that's a very important and very interesting question. I think you're right. Silicon Valley happened because of a unique combination of circumstances. San Francisco is one of the, California is one of the coolest places in the world. Yes. San Francisco is amazing. I've been there several times. The climate is brilliant, food, multicultural, government incentives, and it's had a history, right, for many, many years. Some of the best educational institutions in the world in California, and a lot of that alumnus goes there. So there are many things in favor. Now, India is a very complex country. We're a multicultural country. We have diversity of language. We have diversity of food, diversity of religion, diversity of scripts. There's so many Indias, right? There is a Bharat, there is an Hindustan, there is India, there is so different. I mean, even the India, with all due respect, the India that you live in, Sanat, is very different from the India that I live in, So there's just so many India. There's no one single India. So we need to recognize that. Now, we can do both. And it's not as if we've not tried to do our own version of Silicon Valley. Every major city in India today has electronic cities and tech parks, whether it is Madras, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi. We've got it. We have a lot of digital startups in some smaller towns like Indores and Punas of the world. I mean, you go to this World Trade Center in Pune, it's very, very impressive. Some 250,000 employees work out there. So we have done our own version of it. But really, the innovation is poor, and our level is a mid-level. It's not much value add. It's like BPOs and KPOs and medical transcription, etc. That level it is, because naturally we are good at it. See, we're good at mathematics. Yes. We speak English. So those are certain skills that are ingrained into us from childhood, and therefore they translate well into that mid-level of service industry. But things are improving for sure. I mean, we are coming out with great apps. We are coming out with great digital content, whether it's in cinema or it's in robotics or it's in animation or it's in, so many other artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. Yes. A lot of people working in NASA are Indian scientists. So, I mean, you give them the right ecosystem, the right policy framework, the right living conditions, we can survive and we can contribute and we can prosper. So, on the other hand, look at the success of TikTok in India. Look how quickly TikTok has become some 300 million downloads. So the reality that while it is ByteDance and it is Chinese, etc., and there are all concerns about data being stolen and privacy, etc., the reality is that you cannot ban something that is used by 300 million people. Yes. On the other hand, for every Uber overseas, we have an Ola also. For an Airbnb, we have an Oyo. We have a Book My Show. We have a Make My Trip. and we have Swiggy, which is Indian. So that don't forget that while we may have just copied international models, but in there itself there is some level of वो कहते हैं ना नकल के लिए भी अकल चाहिए. There is some level of stealing with pride, if I may say, involved in that as well. So it's not as if we've been able to replicate it, quicker, faster, cheaper, for instance. The number of Indians who are succeeding in cinema, in digital, in OTT. Today you see a Hollywood movie, wait for the credits to roll. When the credits are rolling, you will see many Indian names. Yes. The number of Indians who worked on the Avengers movies, the number of Indians who worked in, all the big Hollywood films and Jurassic Parks of the world, back-end, animation, production, digital content is large. So we have that capability, but there are a few things that are endemic to our culture. We have a service class mentality, Sanat. Our mentality is service class. We don't think like entrepreneurs. We don't think like businessmen. And I don't blame us. We need that security of the monthly paycheck. We need that blanket coming in. I mean, even today, if I were a traditional father, I have a daughter and she'd said to me, I want to marry this boy. Mm-hmm. If I was someone else, my typical question would be, Ladka karta kya hai? Seriously. Does he have a steady, stable job? That's the first question Indian parents ask. So until that mindset changes, whereas overseas, the first question that a father will ask his daughter is, do you love the man? Seriously. Do you love him? He's not going to ask, what does he do?
Yes.
So that needs to change. I said earlier on, businessmen are seen as crooks. Some of that needs to change. Also, very importantly, Sanat, I think the government's job is governance. It is not running business. There is no business that they have in owning Air India, Indian Airlines, Indian Railways, MTNL, BSNL, ONGC, Steel Authority of India, Gas Authority of India, Coal India, Indian Oil, Oil India. I mean, the whole public sector thing was relevant at a particular time when Nehru started it. But if we do not change with the times, there's so much value to be unlocked by selling all these off. Can you imagine first of all, they'd all be run better if they run privately. Yes. And if they don't run, they'll shut down. That's the problem with capitalism, right? Yes. But the government cannot be involved in business because there's constant conflict of interest. So you cannot be, look at the Indian postal system. Overseas, the postal system is all privatized. So you can't have the government involved in all this.
And
on the other hand, it has changed. Yeah, absolutely. They are talking about selling PSUs, but they can't agree on prices. Yeah. And then the tender condition that they put, very few people can meet them. So they need, again, it comes down to ease of business, right? Yes. What is your job? Is your job to make sure that it doesn't sell? Yeah. Or is your job to make sure that it sells off? Yes, for instance, the Babus in India don't want to sell Air India because how will they get lifetime free business class travel if that goes away? They'll have to start paying for it, or their departments will have to start paying for it. So there are so many vested interests here as well. Now, there are certain areas where India can do really well. Handicrafts. We've always been world leading in handicraft. Tourism. I mean, we can do so much with tourism, Sanat. Yes. Tell me a country that has 7,000 kilometers of coastline. How many countries in the world have 7,000 kilometers of coastline? Can you imagine the potential for water tourism, from water sports to scuba diving, to marine conservation, to, there's so much that can be done. But nobody seems to be opening their minds to that. Medical tourism. So many people come from overseas to get their operations and treatment down here. Education. There's so many people who come from Middle East and African countries. When I was doing my MBA in Pune, half my class was full of Africans and people from the Middle East because it was cheaper and a better quality of higher education here. So maybe people from America will not come. Why can't the Russians come? Why can't the Chinese come? Why can't people from the Middle East come? Why can't people from Africa come to us? Why can't people from Eastern Europe come to us? There's so much we can do with education. Absolutely. And then cinema, of course, we are world-class, digital, a lot of technology, food and beverage. I think food and beverage could become a big global play because we have so many different kinds of food. Yes. Tomorrow, how has chicken tikka masala become so big in England? Not because of the Indians. Yes. It's because of what the English did. And the funny thing is the Yellow Brick Lane or Yellow Brick Road in London, the east end of London near the Olympic Stadium, where all the Indian restaurants are, 90% of them are run by Bangladeshis. How sad is that? Why should a Bangladeshi be running an Indian restaurant in London? Why not Indians? So I think those are some of the things that we need to do. Also, like I said earlier on, I think Indian businesses need to think global. The government needs to do much more on industry and commerce and move beyond politics and religion, man. And the reason they don't is because we don't question them. We are very happy. Our entire sense of identity is from politics and religion. So when that is what we want, why should the government give you more?
Like taking some points from the China as we were discussing, do you think that we are sufficiently prepared to utilize the opportunity provided to us by the like firms walking out of from China and they are like looking for new destination for the establishment? What do you think? What is your take on that?
First of all, no one is walking out of China. That may surprise you, but that is true. Because they didn't come into China overnight. They came into China over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Yes.
And these supply chains take a long time to build. And they can't just walk out overnight, right? So that is number one. They have put in years and years of investment, billions of dollars of investment. They cannot be changed overnight. China has many things going for itself. There's first world infrastructure, literally first world infrastructure. If you go to Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Beijing, it is incredible where they are on infrastructure versus India. I won't say 50 years, I would say they are 100 years ahead of the rest of the world. Forget about being ahead of India. It's incredible. Shanghai, I saw 32 layers of flyovers, one on top of the other. 32. The highest flyover is as high as a skyscraper building. I mean, you cannot even conceive the kind of, I think the top 10 longest bridges, the top 10 longest railway platforms, they say it's incredible, the infrastructure that they have. So speed, scale, supply chain, the whole internet of things, everything is connected. Law and order. I mean, koi sawal nahi hota for you to, even get away with this much of the law violation, right? Then governance. In fact, their labor protection rights are stronger than India's. Their labor protection rights and their social security net in China is stronger than in India's. So that's something that people don't talk about.
Yes.
And of course, I was once talking to Mahendra Singh Dhoni. And
Yes.
Since I know all the cricketers and all the movie stars because I've worked at Pepsi and at Kingfisher UB, and I asked Dhoni, I said, MS, what do you think is the problem with India? And he said, according to me in India, there are too many directors and too few actors, which means there are too many people saying what is to be done, not enough people doing it. China is exactly the other way around, right? They say in India that 99 people propose and one disposes. In China, it is one proposes and 99 dispose of it. There's no question of not obeying the government there. The one child policy means one child policy. You cannot have the second child. So there's just so you can say on the one hand it's taking away my freedom and stuff, but look at the result of what they've achieved.
It's like for a larger gain.
Absolutely, and I've already talked about how a lot of these guys are moving into Vietnam, Pakistan, and Guatemala because of ease of business. And China is like 50 years ahead of us. We cannot catch up. We can never catch up, unfortunately, but we can become much better than what we are.
Yes.
It's like this: if I'm a runner and Eliud Kipchoge is the world marathon, or if I'm a sprinter, I'll never be faster than Usain Bolt. But can I be faster than myself?
Yes. It's competing
I can be inspired by Usain Bolt, and I keep competing with myself, right? We can become bigger and better than what we are. I don't think China should be the benchmark. The other thing that's going to happen, Sanat, is countries are going to go for what's called nearshoring, which means they will start. So America will start looking for factories, to be located in countries that are close to themselves.
Yes.
Mexico, for instance, despite all the fighting that they're having with Mexico. South America, Salvador, Nicaragua, Brazil, all those places are much closer to America.
Yes.
Or maybe even Eastern Europe, shift from China to Eastern Europe, the poorer Eastern European countries, the Romania, Slovakia, Serbia's, Yugoslavia's, etc. of the world. I mean, that is another option. So you're competing not just with, countries that are next to China, but countries that are closer to
their
own countries. What's called nearshoring. Then the level of automation in China is something that we cannot compete. So we need to invest in that, in automation. Things like Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan are great, but it needs to become more than just a slogan. And I want to ask you a question. What if other countries start doing the same thing that we are doing in Atmanirbhar? then nobody will manufacture for anyone else.
Yes.
And I think the government needs to define the entire contours of what Atmanirbhar means. Because how do you become Atmanirbhar and wish that the outside world disappears? It can't. We have to exist in harmony. So while we become self-reliant, it's like America. Every farmer in America feeds 12 families in the world. They produce enough for their domestic requirement, but they also produce for the rest of the world. I think that is what the Prime Minister meant.
Yes.
That we produce enough for ourselves, but also start producing for either countries that are poorer than us or countries where our labor costs are higher, or so on and so forth, right? Like I said, our road, rail, air, sea linkages need to be much better than they are. They have to be seamless, right? So for instance, even today, I don't think you can take a metro train to every airport in every city in the country. You cannot. Why should you not be? You should be able to, yeah. It's probably happening only in the top 3 or 4 cities. And in the Western world, even a small Western country, the size of the airport, the connectivity with ship, sea, rail, road is much better. Forget about commercial, even for regular passenger traffic. So that needs to improve. Tax breaks, the whole taxation policy, frankly, under this government has become very pernicious with GST and income tax and VAT and all sorts of complicated tax systems. I think that needs to improve dramatically. That's a big advantage with a lot of the other countries that we have. A lot of companies and a lot of countries other than China have already been moving to 5G, and they're talking about 6G, whereas we on paper have 4G. And I think the whole and we have I think we have the second largest mobile phone numbers, net subscribers in the world after China, and the way we are going will probably overtake them. But somehow our investments in the new technology, we have worries about China, we have worries about Huawei coming and stealing our data, etc. I mean, technically, why can't we develop this ourselves? Or if we can't, let them come in and make sure that, for instance, the servers are based out of here, out of India, so that we have that data. I know they're talking about doing it, but I think it's a fine balance between producing for ourselves, being self-reliant on the things we can, and producing some of that for the outside world, but also taking the best in the world that is available to us from the outside world.
Yes.
Let's face it, we will never become an Apple. So how can you stop Apple from coming in? Let's face it, we will, never be able to make a Tesla car. So why stop the Tesla car from coming in here? I'm not saying they're stopping it, but I'm saying the thought process should be, if there is something that's in the world that is far better than what we can do, let's get that in. Yes. And if there's something that we can be better at than the rest of the world, let's do that, or not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the world as well. So like I already mentioned, a big domestic market is a big issue. We need to increase the size of our own domestic market. I mean, look at when Alibaba, on their first day, when they went with online shopping, in the day, Sanat, they did more than what the entire year's sale in India was online, in one single day. That's the scale we're talking about. Of course, it has to do with access, number of smartphones, speed of internet connectivity, and people moving towards digital payments, etc., etc. All that stuff needs to be enhanced as well. Already talked to you about the fact that China has first world infrastructure. They have much simpler taxation rules. We have a complicated tax network. We have very rigid and inflexible land and labor laws. Our electricity costs are very high.
Yes.
Look at our electricity costs; they're extremely high. Yeah, yes. I mean, you yourself would. I don't know which city do you live in.
So Delhi and Bhopal, we have.
So Delhi, so you're already reached some 47 degrees, right?
Yes.
And I mean, look at and Bhopal is also extremely warm. It gets very cold. So and so our electricity costs, even for our regular consumption, is very high. So we need electricity costs to be looked in. Tariff regimes are unfavorable. Logistics are poor. I mean, look at during this time, during the COVID time, some 35 lakh trucks were stranded on the highways, and the driver just left them and walked home. So how can you allow something like that to happen? So look at the quality of our roads. Now it is far better than when I was your age, for sure. But is it world-class level today? And also the way they are made, they break down in 1 year because the contractor needs to get work again and again, right? Because the politician is involved in it, the contractor is involved in it. I mean, you look at the highways forget about the autobahns in Germany. You look at the highways in China, and even in India, there are certain places in the south, for instance, and even let's say the Gautam Budh Expressway in the north, the road from the airport in Indore. Bhopal is a beautiful city. You know, it's lovely. Why can't Indore is a beautiful city? Surat has become so amazing. Chandigarh is beautiful. Bombay is a bloody mess. You know, Gurgaon is a mess. You don't have fire engines that are capable of reaching beyond the 10th of 11th or 12th floor. You know, Bangalore, beyond central Bangalore is a total mess. Garbage doesn't get picked up. Forget about highway road quality. But there are roads in the south. Some of them are fantastic. I remember the Trichy to Chennai road is incredible. Hyderabad, Vijayawada, Hyderabad, Bangalore road is incredible. So we can do it. And you know, yes, I know Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee started a golden quadrangle, etc. But I think we need to make much more investment in infrastructure. A couple of other things. Remember that China many years ago pushed out all low-end manufacturing items like toys and shoes and anything that was labor intensive. They just pushed it out. And they re-skilled themselves to look at high-end products like liquid crystal displays, LCDs, high-speed trains, automobile production, robotics. So they moved up the value chain because they realized, Sana, that their labor costs are going. See, initially you have a labor cost advantage. As more money comes in, the laborers also become richer. So the labor costs go up. Now, the only way I can't ask people to take less money. The only way I can handle this is if I move out of low-end manufacturing to high-end manufacturing, where then as a percentage, the labor cost will again come down. So imagine the thinking. It kicked out toys, shoes, and all the low-end and bring in LCDs, automobiles, robotics, high-speed trains. So they've changed the nature of the products for which countries across the world come to them. Now, what has India done? We, for instance, withdrawn from the RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I think we can take a lead role. Also, we have no free trade agreement with the European Union today. So our engaging with the external world has to be more than just our Prime Minister being very popular with their heads of state. Why did we get out of the RCEP? What are we doing for SAARC? What are we doing with G20? What are we doing with NAM? What are we doing with free trade agreement with the European Union? There's so many trade. And listen, Sanat, I don't know whether you've been overseas. You travel overseas and you realize the entire country overseas is driven by trade and commerce, wherever you go in the Western world. Literally from the time you land at the airport, you have to pay $2 for that luggage trolley. So, मतलब पैसा वहीं से खर्च शुरू हो जाता है. We need to change to that system as well. We need to move beyond religion and politics and mandir and masjid and Christians and Sikhs, etc. and move. I mean, one would think that with our multicultural, tolerant, by and large, peaceful history, we would be better positioned to lead the world. But that's only if we step forward, not step backwards.
What do you think is the absolute need of the hour, with respect to the entrepreneurship in the time of COVID? What will be the way forward?
Okay, if I were given $1 for every time I answered this question, I would be a very rich man by now. But I think, and frankly, nobody knows really for sure. Nobody knows how long this will last. Every day we read, and I've actually stopped reading about the coronavirus case because I'm fed up about it. I'm fed up of reading about it. I will do what the government tells me to do. I will maintain all the protocols and health and safety measures and stuff. But in my household, my daughter is the expert. Every day she'll come and tell me this many cases in this part and so on and so forth. So I've stopped reading about it. But yes, business is impacted. And it's funny, when I'll tell you what I believe business should be doing during the COVID era, you will think that this is what you should be doing in any case, regardless of whether there is coronavirus or not. So number one is stick to your core. Stick to what you are good at doing as a business. Conserve cash, conserve capital, drive efficiency, try and get more out of the same, whether it is machinery, people, office space, etc. Try and get more out of it. Forget about all capexes today unless they are necessary. As far as your team is concerned, you need to reskill them. You need to reinvent perhaps your business model. You need to explore new business opportunities, and maybe new channels, but from the same cost base. So on my same team base, can I also add e-commerce to it? Because there's going to be social distancing. People are going to be working from home. I was advising a catering company that is largely into B2B catering. And I said, you have the kitchen, you have delivery staff. why don't you think of doing B2C as well in the new era of working from home and social distancing? So, and that doesn't mean hiring another kitchen. That doesn't mean hiring more people. Don't add to your cost base. Try and look at additional business opportunities and channels from the same cost base. The next one is explore backward integration and forward integration, and maybe completely different product categories. So, for instance, the entire Alcobev industry, or many of the players there, have moved to manufacturing sanitizers because they have alcohol based. I know fabric manufacturers, friends of mine who sell brands on Amazon. They are manufacturing personal protective equipment. They're manufacturing gas sort of masks. They're manufacturing gloves. They're manufacturing face shields, etc. So, getting into different kind of businesses to keep the business going and also take advantage. See, it's a short-term business opportunity, right? A vaccine will be found maybe in 1 or 2 years, and a cure may be found even before that. So, 1-2 saal ka window hai, so people are also looking at that opportunity, right? So maybe backward and forward integration. Most importantly, mentally being resilient, making sure you're investing in mental and physical health and well-being, because that's a serious issue in this country. We're a very depressed nation, and there is a stigma around psychiatrists and psychologists. If I tell my wife that I need to see a psychiatrist, she'll say, "Dimag kharab hai, pagal log jate hain wahan par." So that stigma has to be removed. See, we're a highly competitive nation. You're competing from nursery school seats to primary school to college to engineering. You're even competing with that different boys to get married to that girl and competing for jobs. So we are all the time competing. And there's a lot of pressure on us, and there's no outlet for it. Also, whether you like it or not, we're a sexually repressed nation. So a combination of all that actually leads to, I've got people 40 and 50-year-old, 20, 30-year-olds calling me, howling on the phone. Someone has lost their job. Someone has got their bonus taken away, increment taken away. You have so many companies that have withdrawn pre-placement offers, so, and it's a difficult time. But I'm saying pause, reflect, slow down, reskill yourself, read a book, work out, eat home food, spend time with your family, all that kind of stuff from a personal basis as well, right? Because this working from home will be the new normal, social distancing. I know clients of mine who have started going to office, but even when they are in office, they're not meeting other colleagues face to face. They're still meeting them on Skype or work from or on Microsoft Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or Google Hangouts, So even the guys sitting in the next office, they're not meeting them face to face. And I suppose this will be the new normal. Okay, most importantly, Sanat, ensure your supply chain. In fact, just before you today, I was talking to Himalaya, where I've just finished a project for them, and I said, whatever you do, because the healthcare product, in this time, food and beverage and healthcare, pharmaceutical, these are going to explode. So whatever you do, make sure you are not out of stock. Because literally, jitna maal aap dal sakte ho, wo probably nikal jayega. So you ensure your supply chain is up, you drive your goods availability, drive productivity. And I think personally, I would say support local, because during this time, your local Kirana store really helped you a lot. And he would deliver to your house and stuff like that. I know from my personal experience, whereas all the big air-conditioned supermarkets and all were shut for various reasons. So those are some of the things. A couple of other things I want to say, Sanat, because I've seen a lot of respected companies doing this. People are saying, oh, we are not cutting salaries. Oh, we are giving 30% bonus and increment. Oh, we are, giving everyone promotion. You're not doing anyone a favor, boss, by doing that. That is something that you should do for the past year's work or the past few years' work that they put in, right? So for the love of God, don't brag about it. It's like really bad form to brag about it. Also, if you're doing any charity, don't brag about it. I am doing this much for the corona victim. I'm sending this many people home and this, that. Now you look at the real case of Sonu Sood, who has sent so many people home to various parts. He hasn't spoken about it at all. Other people are talking about it. He's not said a word. And I have so many friends of mine saying, I've donated 5 lakhs to Prime Minister Care, 7.5 lakhs to this. I'm feeding 100 people. And fantastic. Why are you putting it on Facebook? Why are you putting it on LinkedIn? And companies are doing it as well. So be authentic, be kind, be generous, but for the love of God, don't brag. Because, people are being laid off and it's a tough time for everyone. Also, a lot of people may not want me to say this, but HR has an evil agenda during such times.
Seriously.
They will prey on your weaknesses and your insecurities and your fears, and they'll say, Sanat, no bonus for you. Okay, sir. No increment for you. Okay, sir. No promotion for you. Okay, sir. And 30% salary cut. Okay, sir. because यार at least नौकरी तो नहीं गई मेरी,
Yes,
नौकरी बरकरार है. Your expectation has been lowered so low. So the HR guys, along with senior management leadership in many companies, are taking advantage of this and pushing forward their evil agenda.
yes, yes.
I want to ask a question. Since we started with talking about the startup ecosystem, etc. Boss, explain to me. Zomato has laid off 30% of their staff.
Yes.
Swiggy has laid off 10-15% of their staff. Oyo has sacked some 10,000 people in China, 10,000 in America, 10,000 in India. So many companies of these startups are laying off people. Where are all the billions that they raised? Where has that gone?
Yes.
All these billions that they raised for investing in technology, people, and process, where has all this money gone? These people can pay the salaries of all these employees for the next 100 years
Yes. Seriously.
without it making any dent.
Yes.
Where has all that money gone? What is the need for you to lay off these people? So their corporate greed is what is coming in as well, right?
Yes.
So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect is a lot of people say MSMEs are shutting down. And yes, it is true. A lot of MSMEs have shut down because they're saying if we don't function for 3 months, we can't sustain it.
Yes.
And in many cases, it is true.
True.
But you put your hand on your heart and tell me, as an MSME owner in this country, you've not taken money out of the system. You've not bought that big fancy house from that money. You've not bought that big fancy car. You've not put your kids into expensive colleges in America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand. You've taken money out of the system as well.
Seriously.
So
Now
it's a
time.
common, now it's karma is coming to bite you on the back.
Yes.
So, the truth in India is complex, is not straightforward. And Sanat, I'm a very straightforward guy.
No, sir.
I'm politically incorrect, and I want to give your audience a
True.
no holds barred, honest, straightforward, practical advice.
Yes. Yes.
So really, those are some of the things I want to talk as far as COVID is concerned.
Yeah. So at last, we have a large base of students, especially from economics. So
Right.
any words of encouragement from your experience of 32 years in corporate world or in real life experience, words of encouragement?
55 years of life experience and 32 years of corporate work. See, first of all, this is not the first natural disaster or pandemic that we have faced, and it certainly will not be the last. Right? There have been wars, there have been famines, there have been earthquakes, there have been tsunamis, there have been, the Spanish flu in India around the First World War killed some 4 or 5 million people, So this is nothing compared to that. And anyone who tells me that no, but COVID is contagious, of course it is, but so is tuberculosis.
Yes.
Right? And some 1.5 million people die every year of tuberculosis. 900,000 infants die of neonatal deaths in India, 900,000. Some 400,000 die of malaria. How many people have died of COVID? 4,500 or something like that.
Yes.
So yes, it is a tough time, but this is not the first and last time you will face this. And this is what life is. And one line has helped me going through life, Sanat, which is, this too shall pass.
Yes.
Ye waqt bhi guzar jayega. Winston Churchill used to say, when you're going through hell, keep going. Because you will come out on the other side. Right? I will tell you the story of Marwan Attapattu, the cricketer. Marwan Attapattu, a very talented Sri Lankan cricketer. He got selected, scored a lot of runs in domestic cricket. He got selected to play for Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And in his first test, he scored 0 and 0. And he was dropped from the test side for about 4 years. He scored 0 and 1. And he was dropped from the test side. 4 years, he went back to domestic cricket, scored a lot of runs. He came back, he was selected again. In his first test, he scored 0 and 0. Again, he was dropped for 4 years. And again went back to domestic cricket and scored a lot of runs. And imagine how many times he would have thought that maybe I am not good enough to play at the international level. Maybe this is my level.
Yes.
And he got selected a third time for Sri Lanka. And again, he scored 0 and 0. Now, he's been playing cricket for 8 years.
Yes.
At the Sri Lanka international level, and he scored 1 run in 8 years. So he's waited 8 years to score his second run.
Yes.
But full credit to the Sri Lankan Cricket Board. They persisted with him because they saw talent in him, and they selected him a 4th time. And this time he did not disappoint. He went on to score 16 centuries, 5 double centuries, went on to score 6,000 test runs, captained Sri Lanka, and retired as one of the most loved and liked persons to have played Sri Lankan cricket. It's an incredible story of resilience, perseverance, grit, and determination. And if Madhavan Attapattu can do it, then all of us can do it. So really staying the course, and remember that life is a marathon. It is not a 100-meter race. Try and become the best version of yourself. Try and improve on yourself constantly. And frankly, if you are where you are right now, you are exactly where you're meant to be. Because as I don't know whether you know, but I played basketball for India under 19. And I told my coach, कि sir, मेरे जिंदगी में हर चीज 10 साल लेट आती है. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, Samar, समय से पहले और हैसियत से ज्यादा कभी किसी को कुछ नहीं मिला. So as long you can make your peace with that, that is my advice to all of your ecoholics during these difficult, trying times. Keep your spirits up, keep physically healthy, eat well, sleep well, learn new skills, read a new book, learn how to cook, maybe learn how to play a new instrument, learn a new language. Utilize this time to come out as a better human being on the other side.
Thank you so much, sir. We got a lot of experience, a lot of information, and we get to know about that you were like a sports person, basketball as well. So that's a new knowledge for me personally. And it was a wonderful session with you, sir. And it's like words of encouragement that encourage the students. That is for sure. And I would be like very thankful to you to coming on to Thinking Tree and accepted our invitation. And we would surely in touch with you in future with other topics, any other things like teaching real life, the real life.
Thank you, Sanath, and good luck to you and all your ecoholics. Thank you very much.